Good afternoon. Welcome to this next edition of the Leadership Lab. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Lee Newman, Dean of the IE Business School. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Susanna. Pleasure to be here.
So we talk a lot with our scholars about leadership being a journey, not a destination. Where did it begin for you?
So couldn't agree more that in the idea that it's a journey. I would say for me, probably a big inflection point was when I was a management consultant. When I started in that role, I was in McKinsey in Chicago. And for me, that was, I would say, a big inflection point. I was coming from an engineering background where, everything is very clear. You have laws of physics that tell you kind of what to do and how to do it. And I realized in my role as a consultant, I was very young and I was working with people who are, in some cases more than twice my age and 10 times my experience, that I needed to lead. And it was a bit of a shock because what I realized is that there was no rule book for that. I mean, despite all the training and tools you get as a management consultant in these top management consulting firms, it's never enough really. And it doesn't tell you what to do in every moment. It gives you some directional input. So I just realized that, there was no one there to tell me exactly what to do. There are difficult situations you face, particularly with difficult people, right? We're all difficult people for somebody else, and you have your own difficult people in your life. And so I realized I had to kind of go beyond and find my unique way to figure out how to lead. And I think that was the first time I had that thought that leadership is very ambiguous. And despite everything you can read and people can tell you, you got to figure it out for yourself.
I love that idea of we're all difficult people for someone. I think that's a really good concept to hold on to, isn't it? You joined the faculty of IE in 2009.
Correct.
So today, I used to think that if people move jobs within 18 months, that was quite quick. And now I'm hearing about people moving every 8 or 9 months. What's made you stay in one place for so long?
So it's the only place where I really have stayed for a very long time. So there is something special about it, I guess. I value many things, but there's 3 big things that I value in terms of work when I think about evaluating, am I happy at work? And one is really the chance to do big things, to innovate and to have a big goal out there. And if I don't have that, if it's sort of incremental kinds of things, that's interesting for many people, but for me, that's just not what gets me excited. So I want to see that there's something big I can do. And then I have to see that there's at least some reasonable hope of achieving it, that with the resources, the context, the people that are around me, that it could be really hard, and that's what makes it fun. But I need to see light at the end of the tunnel in the context that I've been given to try to achieve the big objective. And then third, having fun. I mean, I'd like to have fun in trying to get to that light at the end of the tunnel with myself, but also obviously with the people that I work with. So I think what's made me stay is that I've had those 3 things. I mean, IE has always given me those 3 things, and I've had the freedom to be me, which I think is not true in many organizations. You're forced to kind of wear masks, or at least you think you do, to be successful. And I've just been me. Now, I haven't been a static me. I've found my little pesky gaps that I've had to fill and grow, learn to fix and develop. But I've always had the freedom to kind of be who I am at my core, even though I'm trying to always chase after the next best version of myself and follow my vision. So that for me is really, I think, kind of been the factor that's kept me at IE and happy.
And what do you think the benefits are for an organization of people growing with that organization?
Yeah, I mean, people are your platform, really, right? I mean, your job can change, new responsibilities, lateral moves, upward moves, et cetera. But I guess the people landscape is the platform that you have to make things happen in your job. And in a way, sort of, once you have that mapped out, it frees up your time and your stress in many ways to then focus on the things you want to do, because you know who your friends are, who your enemies or your antagonists are, and how to deal with them. And I think it's kind of the devil that in a way. And so I think that's one thing is that you've got that people platform mapped out, and that's to change that. I think people probably underestimate how big a change that is when you enter a new organization. As long as you are happy with your platform. If you don't like the platform, then you got to change. But I also think there's a grass is greener phenomenon that goes on a lot. And I know when I sit with other deans, which I do a lot, and we talk about our respective lives in our institutions, I realize that there's so many luxuries that I have just because of the particular configuration and i.e. that works for me. And so all those frustrations that I have, which I have, of course, like anyone, it sort of brings them down to their proper scale, seeing that, okay, yeah, sure, I could go somewhere else, but those problems are going to be much bigger and I lose so many things. So I think the benefit of growing an organization is having that platform that you can use. And it's people tend to underestimate how big the change is when you go from something good looking or great to something that you think is going to be even better. Chances are, if it's already great, it may not get much better, and you could probably make it much better, a little bit better, by just staying where you are and being a leader and taking the steps to try to fix the little problems that you have.
I think there is all sorts of data proving that leaders who've been promoted from within an organization have an infinitely higher success rate than those who've been parachuted in from outside, which I always think is interesting.
Well, yeah, which speaks to the point of it takes a while to map out the landscape.
Yeah.
And I know we think about the same when we think about hiring or promoting from within or hiring. How long is it going to take for this external person to figure it out?
Yes.
i.e. and how to navigate it.
Yeah. So IE is in Spain, see, for those who don't know. But you originally from the US, you went
Correct.
to Brown University, you was the University of Michigan, you were at MIT. How different is the world of US universities and European and particularly Spanish universities?
So I think quite different in many ways. I mean, some of the bones of the skeleton is the same, but I think what I've loved about being in Europe and in being in the work environment of a university in Europe, so referring to the classroom there as well, in addition to my work in the organization, is the international diversity. In the US, you have diversity, but at the end of the day, most people that you work with or you study with in a classroom at a top US university are mostly Americans, and they may have differences in their ethnicities, et cetera. So that, they could be a Ghanaian American or an Irish American, but they're Americans. Whereas at IE, I work with people from countless countries every day. In a classroom of 45 students, they'll be from 25 or 30 different countries. And I think that presents unique challenges, but it's an amazing experience. And for me, moving to a much more, let's say, national environment in terms of people and their diversity would be tough, because I just really enjoy hearing different accents, different languages, and just the benefits of working with people that think differently and are from different places. So I quite enjoy that aspect, which is true of IE in Spain, but Europe and more generally, I think.
It's probably a deeply unfair question, but if I were to ask you which country you would most recommend somebody went to a business school at, and I think we'll just exclude Spain on the basis that you
Spain, of course, but
of course. So what would be the next best choice for any, so I think particularly of our scholars who might be thinking of going on to business school in a few years? Where would you recommend?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll give you the lawyer answer, which is it depends. I think it depends in the sense of if someone's interested in DBI, doing business in a particular region, then they have to go to school there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I mean, if you have a particular family background or a particular part of the world that's exciting to you, then going to business school in that part of the world, I think, makes a lot of sense. But for some people, it might just be the language and the culture, and they'd like to be immersed in it, regardless of their studies and where they want to work. But if it's sort of language and culture and having a really different experience is interesting, then I think, being able to learn Chinese or Hindi or Arabic, 3 of the world's most popular languages, could be really interesting, or being in more emerging market business environment could be really really interesting for people that want to do that, and have that adventure. And if I think entrepreneurship, if someone's really interested in entrepreneurship, I think Africa gets really interesting. You know, I'm thinking Ghana or South Africa or Nigeria. I mean, the talent pool of the future. I mean, Africa is just amazing. And people think of it from a development standpoint, but the for-profit entrepreneurial opportunities that are happening and that are there in those kinds of countries, like I mentioned, is amazing. So for someone who really wants to bet on the further out future as an entrepreneur, that would be an amazing experience. Now, we're going to school there, or going to a school that has immersions there that you could spend time in, like we have those, and many schools do as well. So
Thank you.
so it depends, but
No,
many interesting opportunities outside of Spain.
That makes perfect sense. One of the things that we were talking about a bit earlier was that leaders of US universities seem to be under incredible scrutiny at the moment, and are being asked to make statements around geopolitical issues, which arguably have nothing to do with business education or even an undergraduate education. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are definitely different opinions on whether or not we have a role. I think I tend to think that putting pressure on a university or a business school to make statements doesn't make sense. I think it sort of misses the point of a university, but that's an opinion, obviously. I think a university or a business school should be a safe place for uncomfortable, sometimes in critical, debates and development of critical thinking. And I think that the moment that a university takes a position, you're always stepping towards one group of your population, students or alumni, and away from another, no matter what you do. And no matter how justified you think that step is, it could be 99% justified and the world agrees with you, but then you still step away from some group of your students. And so I think the mission of a business school or university is to kind of not step towards one group and away from another, but to embrace them all and say, look, we're in this together here, at least. You can go back home and maybe you're going to pick up a gun and fight a war, but here we're in this together. And I think that that's the critical ingredient in this. And the second that we start to act like we're a media channel, we miss our true purpose. And I think it biases our actions and our relationship with our people. So that's the camp I come from on that.
Yeah, President Paxson said something very similar. And I know that IE has amazing relationships with Brown University.
Yes.
She was very much of that same opinion, that their role is to help their students think about these very complex, very difficult issues, but not to tell them what to think, which I thought was an important nuance.
Yeah, and it's so rare that there's one story in any situation, and then information and situations evolve so quickly. So even if you do take a step in one direction, thinking that it's the right direction, I mean, months later, it's not so right, and then you want to step back towards the, and it's just, that's not our job. I think so.
One of the things that makes IE, of course, quite unusual is that you started as a business school and then added a university. What are the strengths of that, and maybe some of the challenges that come along with it too?
So yeah, so it's a very unconventional approach, and we're very unconventional in that sense. So I think on the positive side, I mean, we started as a business school, and that gives us a business school DNA, which to me means proximity to industry, to the real world, to practice, let's say, of where one might apply learning. And so I think that equates to relevance. I think that's kind of the big word, if I had to choose one, would be relevance. And an example of that, so we've recently launched the School of Humanities. I think we all know the humanities are absolutely under pressure globally. I mean, their budgets are getting cut, their sub-departments are getting closed. But we're launching a School of Humanities. Why? Because we're focusing on something a bit different, right? So we bring that, let's say, business school thinking, even though it's humanities. So we're thinking about things like digital culture and understanding that from a humanistic perspective. I mean, how is the digital world going to change who we are and how we are on this planet, work together, et cetera, et cetera. So we just have a different take on things, including the humanities. And I think that that's been a big benefit, in addition to pedagogy. So we tend to have the very active business school type pedagogy, case method, discussion, and so forth, which the humanities also brings. But that idea of case method and dealing with the real world, bringing that into the classroom applies to us as a university. And I think that that's interesting. So those I think are the benefits. The challenge, the challenge of any kind of, when you extend the scope of your portfolio, your brand, so to speak, there are all the challenges of doing that, which is, moving away from your core, establishing a reputation, et cetera. So we're building a school of science and technology, and, it's going to take a little bit of time. But we have the uniqueness of coming from an innovation and entrepreneurship oriented business school, which obviously has huge and important consequences on how we think about technology.
And entrepreneurship really is a distinctive part of your DNA, isn't it? Because it's not just that you started as a business school, but that your business school was founded by entrepreneurs. And,
Right.
and you've been a successful entrepreneur yourself. You've had 2 startups, which is fantastic. And Laidlaw is all about entrepreneurship too. And as you know, we have Laidlaw Scholars Ventures, where we invest in the startup ideas of our scholars. Why do you think that entrepreneurial spirit, that entrepreneurial mindset is important for the business school, but more widely in education?
So for me, I think it's a lot about can-do attitude, and one of the things, I have my negatives about my country, the United States, but we do have this kind of entrepreneurial can-do attitude, right? And it always sounds easy, but when you're facing smart people, we're pulling out of their pocket all sorts of facts and counter examples and arguments to what you want to do. It's not easy to sort of say yes, but I still think it's possible. I'm going to do it. And I think that's when we talk about entrepreneurial mindset, it's really about that. It's about, I think, cultivating what I would say is a difficult balance between, let's say, bright-eyed confidence and utter paranoia. So, the ability to say, I love this idea and I am wedded to it. I'm going to stick behind it because I've chosen to for good reasons. But then waking up every day and saying, wait, that competitor looks too powerful. I'm scared, or this isn't going to work, and constantly questioning yourself. And I think that's something that takes time to develop, the ability to hold those two things in your mind without going crazy, so to speak. And I think that's what you get from entrepreneurship, is cultivating that.
I think that's so true, and it completely resonates for me, because obviously Lord Laidlaw, who funds all of the foundation and all of our programs, was a highly successful entrepreneur, and still in his 80s is constantly looking at things in that way, what else can we do? How can we make this better? Is there somebody else that we can learn from? And that restless and insistent desire to do more better, which I think is really at the heart of that entrepreneurial mindset.
And I think that's why foundations like the Laidlaw Foundation are so important, because in that balance between, let's say, this bright-eyed confidence and paranoia, so to speak, getting diverse inputs into your thinking, I think, is absolutely critical. You just have to collect alternate opinions and diverse opinions, and so you need to do that. You have to be surrounded by diversity, and right, and which is not always the case in schools. It's not always the case in companies. And so I think any organization that is trying to foment and build diversity, I think, in a certain way, is also supporting entrepreneurship.
Your brand promise, if I've got this right, is the next best you.
Yes.
And which I love. I think it's so powerful. It obviously has the career element in it, but I think you also have 2 other areas around impact and purpose, which I think is less usual for a business school.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you lean into those two things as well, because I would say that they're a bit more my world in terms of philanthropy.
Yeah, so impact we define, we call it your impact, and it's a part of this idea of the next best you. And so the idea there is this is not social impact. That's what we call your purpose. But impact for us is the skills you need to make things happen in facing difficult business challenges, difficult workplace situations and contexts, and difficult people, of which, of course, we are part of those difficult people for somebody else. And so I think while the career specific skills that business schools are known for are necessary, they're not sufficient for being successful. And that's what we hear over and over again from recruiters. Yes, great. This person has fantastic marketing skills, but they also need these other things. And so for us, it's about getting the job by having career skills, but succeeding in your job in your first years after IE by having these, for us, thinking skills, behavioral people skills, and digital skills now. So that's why we've doubled down on that. So it's not just about the career specific skills, but these skills that you need to make things happen at work. And that's important to us and to success of our students. And then you asked about purpose as well. So for us, we call it business with purpose, and we lean into that, I would say, for two reasons. I mean, first, we believe in it. So we have a very strong belief that a business toolbox is a very useful one for driving positive change. I mean, we all know so many people, idealistic people out there that really, really want to make the world a better place, but they don't do it because they can't mobilize people. They can't get money and investments behind what they're doing and articulate a narrative that sells investors or mobilizes people. So we believe that the business toolbox is a toolbox for positive change. And so we're investing in that and leaning into that because we want our students to be exposed to that, whether they do it for their job or whether it's a little strand of DNA that expresses itself later in their career. But we also see that the students want it. I mean, increasingly, we're seeing that the generations coming in are very purpose-driven. I mean, they turn down what would have formerly been fantastic jobs, high-paying jobs for jobs where they feel like they're going to have a greater, they can realize their purpose and have a greater social impact. So we're doing it because we believe in it, but also because we're customer-focused and the customers are asking for it.
I was interviewing Dr. Rose Patton, the Chancellor of University of Toronto, who's just released a book on intentional leadership. And she says the single most telling question, or the answer to the question that tells her whether a leader is going to be successful, is when she says, "What is your impact?" And if they think in those terms and are really clear about what is their purpose and are they achieving it, and that can be in the business sense, it can be more in a societal sense, but if they can't articulate what the impact is that they're having, then they're completely missing the point of being a leader. So I think it's really interesting that that so aligns with what you're doing.
Absolutely aligned. Yeah.
So we're obviously having this conversation because we are so thrilled to announce that we're going to be working together on a new women's movement where our foundation and the IE Foundation together, we're going to be sponsoring at least 14, maybe a few more, women to earn their MBAs at IE. What are your hopes for the program?
Well, first, thank you for the relationship and for helping us with this important mission. Thankful to have the chance to work with you. So I think business schools globally still have a lot of work to do, both in gender diversity, but more generally in access to business education for different disadvantaged groups, right? So I mean, our hope for the program is to make some positive steps towards that. I mean, we've reached parity or greater than parity in terms of men and women in programs in many of our programs, but I think with the MBA, we still have some work to do. So we're excited to just make progress on that important mission and do that together. But I think also, I mean, beyond numbers, I mean, I think we have the chance to access a group of people, not just women, but women from a particular background. And I think that, I mentioned earlier this idea of diverse inputs. And I think we just need people from different backgrounds. And business schools are not necessarily known for top business schools for tapping into underprivileged populations, right, from the standpoint of socioeconomic background. And so I think the combination of looking for women who come from those backgrounds is particularly unique. And also, I think, our mission is to design a special micro journey, we call it, for those students, and have this not just be that they get to be here and participate in our ecosystem, but that we actually give them some special elements that will really catapult them in their careers, which I think will be very exciting. And I'm looking forward to working together to design that experience, that journey.
Fantastic. Yeah. When we launched the program at LBS, Francois Ortala-Magni, the outgoing dean, said he didn't realize until much later that it made him rethink everything they were doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that it's had a profound impact on how he thinks about other groups that perhaps had been marginalized or not included, who they either weren't reaching out to in an active way, in the way that they are now doing for women from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, and that I know you're going to be doing. Do you think it will have any impact for you in terms of your other programs, so a wider impact across all of IE?
Yes, I hope for it to have that. I mean, both in the sense of inspiring us to do similar things in other programs, but I think this idea of designing a unique experience for these students, in this case, women from certain socioeconomic backgrounds. But I think if we get that right, it's gonna give us a platform to do it with other groups, and what those could be. I don't know, LGBTQ plus. It could be, but it may not even have to be disadvantaged populations. It could be any group of people who just traditionally are not going to business school for a variety of reasons, because there's a difficulty in it. There's an extra challenge to it. And we'd like to solve that challenge. So we think about it as kind of bridge to business in a way. How can we help people who don't, they see a chasm to getting into the business school and going to a business school, and how can we put a bridge over that chasm and get them there? So I think this will give us many ideas, and the experiences we have will be learning experiences for us that we'll be able to leverage.
Great. One of the bridges that I suppose you created early on was with geography, in that IE was an early pioneer of online education. And I think every year that I've looked, you've been at the top of the FT rankings for online learning. How did you start so quickly on that? What made you get there way before everybody else who, in the pandemic suddenly had to then scramble to put together their programs?
Well, I think the reason, we've talked about some of the reasons in a certain sense indirectly, in that we were founded by an entrepreneur. So that gives us a certain DNA already, so sort of sensing the future and looking for opportunities. That was one of them. I think that the fact that we are a business school and we became a university is also helps us, with those kinds of things. But really, we just happened to see it, and we went after it, and we had the kind of the organizational, let's say, will to go after a big risk. Because now people are still talking about whether online education is the same or not. But imagine, way back in the early 90s, it was a very different conversation. So I think that, yes, that's something that just happened as part of who we are.
You obviously weren't involved with that because that was sort of before
Yes.
you were running things. But you talked about, right at the beginning, one of the reasons why you love being where you are is the chance to do big things. Are there particular big things that you feel that you personally owned and delivered that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, thankfully. Well, we talked about the next best you, and that's something that I've helped pioneer. But I think going maybe back a little bit, I mean, we sensed that the business education was going to be moving towards specialized training, specialized masters, business masters are sometimes called. And so we invested heavily in that, and we jumped in very early in that. So this is going back about 13 years or so. And we started launching specialized degrees. So we were the first school in the world to launch a master's degree in customer experience design, CX. And, and people thought that's kind of narrow, isn't it? And we said, we don't think so. We think it's the next big thing. And every company's going to have a chief customer experience officer or something similar in the future. So we went through a number of those kinds of things where we sensed an opportunity, and we were willing to take the risk of launching a degree. So that's something I think I'm particularly proud of with my team of having sensed those opportunities and chosen the right ones. And we were successful in almost all of them. A few fails, but in general successful. So we're proud of it.
You should be. You recently suffered the devastating loss of your colleague and friend, Norman Kurtis. And obviously, we all send our sincere condolences and sympathies. I know he was really widely admired, and the few times that I met with him, I just thought he was so incredible, both personally and professionally. I know it must be just so tough for you at the moment, but are there things about him as a leader that you would maybe like to take this moment to remember or celebrate so that other people can learn from his leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we're spending time on, just as a way to honor his memory. But I think what was really unique about Norman was just that he had qualities that are very rarely found, at least in my experience, in the same person. Like what I mean is kind of juxtaposed qualities, right? So people would often meet him for the first time and say, wow, he's intimidating. I mean, he sort of looks at you, piercing eyes, is quite intimidating. He interviewed me, or he was grilling me on this. And yet, very shortly thereafter, or even in the same meeting, they would find out he's a very kind, extremely kind and empathetic person that puts himself, behind his priorities for other people, right? Other people first. But many other examples. I mean, he was very impatient in meetings with time. I need to save time. Let's move this meeting. Let's get results. Let's get out of here. And yet incredibly generous with the amount of time he spent mentoring and coaching and helping other people at IE. I mean, incredible amounts of time. So again, kind of an interesting juxtaposition. I mean, he was fantastic in the spotlight. I mean, amazing speaker on the stage, but the kind of person that didn't actually seek it out. There was not an ego there. Like, okay, I'm looking for the next big opportunity to do my thing on stage. It was more, the spotlight had to find him, which I think is an interesting mixture of humility and yet presence on the stage. And, maybe one other sort of contrast was, he was running around constantly from call to meeting to coffee machine, back to another call, back to the coffee machine, back to another meeting. So kind of a bit of chaos in a certain sense. And yet, anytime we had a crisis or any chaos going on that we needed to deal with, he was the go-to person for being stable, calm, and keeping the ship going forward, in stormy waters. So I think that's sort of what we're all realizing, is that those are interesting qualities to have in one person, and we're all thinking about how we might follow in that path.
Have you thought how you'll honor his memory, or is that still a work in progress?
So we're thinking about some formal things we could do institutionally, obviously, to kind of honor him in a formal way. But I think right now we're thinking that really the greatest honor you could bestow on someone that you've lost, that you care about, is making a positive change in ourselves, or in something here that hasn't disappeared, based on the person that you've lost. And since we're a B school and our motto now is the next best you, I mean, I think we're all really taking quite seriously, actually, trying to codify some of the things like I just mentioned about Norman, and asking ourselves, I mean, maybe I could cultivate some of those things that he did so well. So I think everybody in their own unique way is trying to do that as a way to kind of honor him.
That's really beautiful. It must be just so hard dealing with both the personal loss and the professional loss as well. I am struck that very often people don't realize quite how hard leadership is, even without something like this, which is, you know, just out of the blue and all round devastating. Do you think that actually the world getting sort of messier and more polarized has added a layer of complexity and difficulty to running a large organization, which maybe wasn't the case even 5-6 years ago?
I think it's true, but I think it does depend on who you are and what you've been tasked to lead in a certain sense. So I mean, there are leaders whose mandate is let's say structure, quality, standardization, incremental improvement. I mean, solidifying an organization, for example. And I think for them, a more complicated, messy world delivers a ton of ambiguity that makes their lives very hard. Right. So in a strange way, the people who are trying to do things more incrementally and solidifying have a tougher time. Whereas I think if you're a leader who's been given a mandate for innovation and entrepreneurship, in a certain sense, I mean, you don't want to see these complications, many of them in the world, but they are there. And I think in a certain sense, that ambiguity creates opportunity. I mean, that's what we're trained to do as entrepreneurs. That's what we teach in IE Business School. So, you know, it's because no one knows the answers. And so that I think that for someone who's is an entrepreneur by mindset and has been given an entrepreneurial mandate, that ambiguity from a messy world just opens a giant door that says, look, no one has the answer. So be bold, take risks, and go after it. So and that my mandate happens to be that style, and that's more my personality. So for me, the fact that there's no right answer for me to find that I could mess up on is in a certain sense empowering. Like, no one's got this figured out, so why don't I try my best? Let's make some decisions and see what opportunities we can capture. So I agree that it's a very complicated world, but it depends on, I think, what your mandate is as to whether that complicates or your life or creates opportunities. Probably a balance of both for everybody, but not equal proportions.
If embracing ambiguity, being bold, taking risks are important traits to cultivate as a leader, what might be some other ones?
So I mentioned before confidence versus paranoia. I mean, human beings are cognitive dissonance. We don't like to have competing things. We like to resolve, right, to A or B, but we don't like to hold A and B in our mind for too long. I think leading it, you have to have both. I mean, the world asks for you, your ecosystem asks you to be confident, to make decisions and stand behind them, change them when they go wrong. But confidence is critical. But overconfidence is a slippery slope. I mean, from confidence, right? And so I think leaders have to be paranoid. I mean, the Intel CEO many years ago wrote a book, I think, called Paranoia. So I think that's a critical thing to cultivate. Another one I think is, and probably the hardest, is you get so much, you should seek so much diverse, input and diverse feedback, et cetera, to make your decisions. But I think really maybe the heart of leadership is knowing. You always should listen to it, but knowing when to heed it and when to chuck it in the trash can. And there's no rule book for that. I mean, that's just pure judgment, right? And there's no way to ever really know. But you have to make that decision, and entrepreneurs do it all the time, and et cetera. So I think that's a big one. And I would say storytelling as well. I think leadership requires a mixture of fact-based, evidence-based arguments, but sometimes those just fall flat because human beings like stories. And I think a leader needs to combine the facts and the evidence with the learning how to evoke emotions with a great story. And few people are able to do both of those well. And I think that those are things we would like to teach our students. And all of us as leaders, should try to cultivate. It's not easy.
What's the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
I mean, one decision or just in general? I mean,
Whichever.
I think for me, it's maybe it's a little bit cliche, but I mean, I think letting people go, I mean, having to dismiss people, for me is very tough. I mean, I studied behavior change. I mean, behavior change is notoriously difficult, right? So this whole idea that, people don't change, but I fundamentally don't believe that. And so I guess when you let someone go, it leaves me feeling that, it may be justified, in an objective way, but somehow I, as a leader or manager, or us as an ecosystem, I mean, wasn't there anything we could have said, that exact right sentence that might have flipped them to a new mode? Or isn't there some redesign of the context around them that might have, lit a fire where we were looking for one and it just wasn't there? And the answer is probably it would have been too hard, and who knows, we can't spend all our time doing that. But I do feel a sort of a personal failure when dismissals happen in many cases. And so for me, that's always tough.
Me too. Though I did say that once to an old boss, and he said, well, good. And I said, oh. And he said, well, you'd be a monster if you didn't think this was just an incredibly hard, tough thing to be doing. And actually, that's always given me a little bit of solace in when you do make that change, because it is the right thing for the person and the organization, that it should feel bad.
Agreed. Yeah, different approaches, but I tend to fall back to the human one. And another approach is the surgeon's approach, which is, you just need to harden yourself and tell yourself this is needed to be done. You just move on. But not my style, but it's another approach, and it's equally valid.
You've met leaders from all over the world, and when we ask our scholars for leaders that they aspire to be, or that they admire, or that they've heard of, they tend to roll out the obvious ones, the Nelson Mandelas and so on. So I realize it's a big question when you meet so many people, and I don't want you to feel awkward about choosing one person over another. But could you maybe talk about a leader who you admire, who isn't one of the obvious ones?
Sure. So I've been spending some time in the world of jazz and blues music, and kind of going back to the roots of the United States, to the early 20th century, like early 1900s. And so maybe I'll start there, and it's a more subtle, less obvious one, as you asked for. So there are many examples there, but I think Mary Lou Williams, the famous jazz pianist, is one example. So she was, she had a 60-year career starting, in the early 1900s, right? Sort of during the Roaring '20s era. And I mean, there were no women who were musicians. I mean, we can all think of the famous women singers, jazz singers, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, et cetera, et cetera. But Mary Lou Williams played the piano, and not just played it. I mean, she was exceptional. I mean, she was fantastic. And she not only played the piano, she was an arranger. She made major contributions to some of the subgenres of jazz, like bop and swing and spiritual jazz in particular, in a world where women were only singing. And that, you put yourself back in that environment with, a band of men playing saxophone and drums and, a stand-up bass, et cetera, and a woman at the piano. And the piano is a big part of the personality of a jazz band, especially at that time. So, I think that's amazing. And this is someone who, to make her ends meet, was doing odd jobs on the side while she was doing all of this. She ended up teaching at Duke University in the later parts of her life, teaching music. So, I think people like that, or Benny Goodman. I mean, he was the first white jazz musician to take the risk to put a Black man in his band. And he put Teddy Wilson, the piano player, and that was a big deal I mean, everybody was listening to each other's music, but you didn't go on stage with a mixed race band at that time. And Benny Goodman said, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. So many examples, but I think Mary Lou Williams, Benny Goodman, and many other examples of people who really pushed the boundaries of race relations, gender relations at the time through the world of music. And the arts and music have always been something that changes our world in many ways, right? So that would be for me
That's
a
great.
source of admiration.
Thank you. We ask all of our guests what question they would like to ask the next guest. And at first our idea was we would just ask the last guest the question for the next guest.
Okay.
But the questions are also good. I always feel it's a bit of a waste just to ask one. So I'm gonna tell you what the different questions are, and then you can choose the one that you would like to answer. So Francois from LBS asked, what makes you angry? Because he thinks that that's an emotion that helps drive purpose, right, and drive action. Sally Mapstone, the Vice Chancellor of St Andrews University, who's an incredible leader, thinks that anger is absolutely a wasted emotion, but she thinks of it in terms of social justice. So her mantra for herself every day when she gets up is, what am I going to do today to improve social justice? So her question was, what is your mantra? So what is the thing that makes sure that you stay focused and on it and driven? Chris Paxson, who you know, asked a slightly different question, and hers was, what brings you joy? And that for her was an important focus when there's so much in a leadership role that is complicated, that's difficult, and sometimes it feels like that all you're getting is problems thrown at you. Being able to focus on what brings you joy is important. And then I've only got two more. Eloic from HEC was asking, what do you wish you'd known when you were 30 years old? So it was a good one. And the last one was from Rose Patton, who wanted to know about impact. And if there was one thing where you said, this is the impact that I have as a leader, what would it be? So there, huge number of choices.
Great questions. And so what is my?
You get to choose any one of those questions to answer.
To answer, okay. Well, I'll choose, I think it was Chris Paxton's question, what brings you joy?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, a very general one, but I think in the workplace, I think for me, it's the resolution of dissonance, or the resolution of conflict in a way. And I don't mean conflict like a interpersonal conflict, but I mean, the difference between a computer playing music, for example, or a human being like jazz and a jazz artist is, I mean, what makes music great are those moments where you feel like something's going off. You know, the note is coming too late. Oh, they're about to make a mistake. You know, that, and then it gets resolved and it comes in, and actually the timing is exquisite, even though you thought it was going to be wrong. Or, you know, a note that sounds dissonant, but then because of the notes that come next, it actually becomes part of a pattern that is consonant. And I think for me, that brings me a lot of joy in music, but at work as well. I mean, the idea of setting a really big goal that actually you might not be able to achieve. You know, because this is the innovator, this is what you do as an entrepreneur and innovator. You say, look, I'm going to do it. And in a way, the more you say it publicly in your organization, the more you're on the line. But I like that in a way, because it creates a lot of motivation, obviously. And then, you know, when something goes well and you're able to deliver it, it's like that consonant note or set of chords that follow a moment of dissonance where it just feels great. You know, and you've had your tough moments, but I think that's a wonderful part of work. And I think without that, you know, we're just kind of chugging along, doing our everyday. But we spend so much time at work I think we all got to know what is that little spark that brings joy to you. And for me, that's it. For other people, it might be different.
And what would you ask another
What
leader?
question would I ask
Yeah.
to add to the list? I like the question. I mean, to maximize kind of the insight you get from the leader answering the question. For me, a good question is kind of, what is the one biggest mistake you've made that you would go back and undo, and what did you learn from having made it? So I guess that's two questions, but
It's great though.
but what is that mistake that that you made that you would undo, and what did you really learn from it? And I think that says a lot. I asked a team of people recently to answer that question for me, and I had someone that said nothing.
Wow.
I mean, I asked it for a particular time period, so maybe there was nothing big enough to pass that person's threshold. But it's a tough question. But I think we all should know our mistakes and our great failures, and what we learn from them is the best hope we have for growing and not making them again, right? So I'd like to know. I'd like to have leaders answer that question, because I could certainly learn a lot from hearing the answer.
Done. It will be the next question, and I'll just ask that one and not give them any other choice. Lee,
I look forward to it. The
so
answer.
much. I really
Thank you.
appreciate your time and all your wisdom, and particularly taking the time out to join us right now when I know you've got so much going on. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.